Extreme heat is gripping Australia with temperatures in several states set to climb above 40 degrees Celsius yet again. Catastrophic fire danger ratings are in place across Victoria, which remains under a total fire ban. Officials say current conditions have created some of the most dangerous bushfires in 6 years' time since the Black Summer blazes. The threat is expected to intensify with strong winds and thunderstorms forecast to worsen the danger. Authorities say 3 people, including a child, are unaccounted for in the town of Longwood, one of the hardest hit areas. Helping us unpack extreme heat in Australia and its impact is Sarah Perkins-Kirkpatrick. She's a climate science professor at the Fenner School of Environment and Society at the Australian National University. Sarah, thanks for joining us. My first question for you is, how does this heat wave compare scientifically to Black Summer, and what are the most dangerous similarities people may be underestimating?
Yeah, that's a really good question and something that we're really looking into at the moment. The key thing, there is some differences between what we're experiencing now in Australia and what we experienced about 6 years ago, and that's the fact that we aren't currently in a long-term drought. And so in Australia, when we are in a long-term drought, we're much more likely to see hot, dry conditions that are, very significant, and that's exactly what we had going into Black Summer. This year, we don't have that sort of really dry conditions, but we do have the same type of weather system that led up to the fires and also the heat that we saw in 2019, 2020. So it's very similar to what we experienced 6 years ago, but it's not identical. And hopefully, mercifully, I hope that the conditions and how the next 2 days play out will be not quite as extreme or even much less extreme than what we experienced 6 years ago. But we just have to wait and see for that.
And just yesterday, you wrote an article for The Guardian explaining about this, that extreme heat kills more Australians than all other natural hazards combined. Then why is heat still treated as a secondary risk compared to bushfires or floods?
This is $1 million question. I'd even say it's $1 trillion question, and it's an issue not just in Australia but globally. And I think it's something that it comes down to a number of issues. One being that the deaths from extreme heat aren't instantaneous. It usually happens up to 2 days after the exposure. And secondly, it's how people present when they are affected by heat in a detrimental way. Usually it exacerbates underlying conditions, or if you're unlucky enough to get heat stroke or heat stress, generally the deaths are put down to cardiac arrest and not necessarily heat stress. So it's much more insidious. It kind of flies under the radar, if you will. But we know as scientists and many health professionals out there really do know that when we have extreme heat like this, so many more people are unwell, so many more people present to emergency rooms, and so many more people are at risk of unfortunately dying. But it's just getting the knowledge out there that just because it's hot doesn't mean that you won't be sick. We really need the public and even the government to get more on board about what we can do to prevent morbidity and mortality during extreme heat events.
Speaking of prevention and raising awareness, Australia frequently talks about net zero. And based on the science, do you think net zero actually is enough to protect Australians alive today?
Look, the short answer is no. I don't want to take away from any discussion whatsoever around net zero. It is fundamentally imperative. We must reach net zero, not just here in Australia, but globally, if we have any hope of stabilising our global climate. But unfortunately, we've now reached a point where just reaching net zero is no longer enough. And again, this is not just an Australia problem, it's a global problem. We must adapt. We know that even if we stabilise the climate at 2 degrees global warming, or hopefully it's not much higher than that, we are locked in for some changes, likely for centuries to come. And particularly in Australia, we're actually locked into heatwave changes or heatwave increases for at least the next millennia, which is really concerning for someone like myself. So yes, we have to reach net zero. There's no question about that. But we must also do more than that. We now have no choice but to adapt, whether it's at the individual level or the city or the country level. We must adapt as well. They go hand in hand together now.
I want to expand on that last comment you made. We have to adapt. Then what is the single most urgent adaptation measure Australia has failed to implement?
Oh, goodness, that's a really good question. I don't think there is a single most one. We do have a habit of building our houses like glorified tents here. And I mean that they're not well insulated, they're not really built for the climate. That even goes for winter too, to be honest. In heat waves like the one that we're in now, heat is trapped inside the house, particularly when the heat wave has lasted for a long period of time. The heat builds up and people don't have the necessary infrastructure to stay cool, or even the design of the house to stay cool inside. If people are able to stay cool inside their workplace or homes, they're much less likely to be exposed to the extreme conditions and therefore less likely to present to emergency departments. And I think in Australia, at least, we have a problem there. Our building codes just aren't up to scratch or up where they need to be to help alleviate a lot of the heat exposure, particularly when looking into the future and knowing what's to come. If we can put those measurements in place now, those regulations in place now, then it safeguards future populations and, those wheels get in motion as early as they need to be.
I guess the silver lining, though, looking at this situation, is that officials took immediate measures. They've announced emergency alerts. They've evacuated residents. But still, the medical impacts are quite severe. We are seeing hospitals a bit strained. And also, I guess it's a long-term issue that we need to be looking at. So if policymakers were listening to our discussion right now, what is the one decision they should make before the next summer?
Before the next summer, they need to strengthen, if we're talking about extreme heat mortality, they need to strengthen our public health infrastructure. Like you just said, it's already under strain. COVID really tested our systems, again, not just in Australia, but globally. But certainly here in Australia, we need to do more to have better prevention and better resources around people being affected by extreme heat. But I think that also needs to be coupled with greater public awareness and education. We do a much better job of telling people what to do when it's very hot. There's many more warnings and many more forecasts available now. But there's still this sort of conversation in Australia that, so what? It's summer. It's hot here. It's always been hot here. But the bottom line is, even though it is, normal for us to have heat waves during summer, our bodies don't differentiate between that. If it's extreme and if it's going to affect us and, affect us physiologically, it doesn't matter if it's normal or not. It will happen. And unfortunately, we need to change that public perception here in Australia that we're used to the extreme heat and it doesn't affect us, because fundamentally it really does.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight. That was Sarah Perkins-Kirkpatrick, professor of climate science at ANU's Fenner School of Environment and Society.